G'day everyone, thanks for joining us on Let's Talk Rugby for the final show of 2013. I'm Scott Allen and we're brought to you by the raw.com.au, Australia's largest sports opinion website. In this episode there's a panel of four of us from the Raw. We're going to talk about the Wallabies match against Wales, but what I really wanted to talk about is a bit of a review of the Wallabies in 2013, where we've been and where we're going. What was originally planned as a quick 30-minute chat turned into a very interesting 1 hour long discussion. There was too much good stuff that I didn't want to cut out, so I've ended up producing the show in two parts. Today we'll do the Wallabies review, and we'll talk a bit about the cultural issues that we've seen in 2013. Next week we'll look into the crystal ball about where the team may be going over the next couple of years. So let me introduce the other members of the panel today. Firstly, we've got Brett McKay. How are you, mate?
I'm well, mate. Well, happy to be back.
And then we've also got joining us Elisha Pearce. How are you, Elisha?
Good, Scott. How are you doing?
Really good, mate. Fourth member of our panel, you'll know from the Raw as Uncle Argyle. How are you, mate?
Oh, excellent, Scott. Thanks very much for having me on.
Let's start off with Wales. I thought the performance was the best of the year. Great way to finish off the year. Now, that's 4 wins in a row now, and pleasingly, it's 9 in a row against Wales, so that's got to start hurting them. I thought the Wallabies were mentally very strong. Early in the match they came from 10 points down twice, and then in the last 6 minutes with Quade Cooper in the sin bin, they held on to a very tight victory. One thing that I made a point in my article the other day, they created so many opportunities but didn't convert enough of them. I really thought the score could have been a lot higher than it was and a much greater margin. Basically what the Wallabies did was they allowed Wales to stay in the contest. Brett, what did you think were the best elements of the Wallabies' performance in this match?
Breakdown, mate, without any shadow of a doubt. I'll backtrack for a minute and I'll say I absolutely agree with you that the scoreline probably flattered Wales, to be perfectly honest, because they didn't really look like firing a shot, if we can be completely honest. But certainly the breakdown performance was top notch for the 80 minutes. You're talking in Wales, in Dan Lydiate, Sam Warburton, and Toby Faletau, you're talking about Grand Slam winners, Lions, all of them, and Fardy, Hooper and Moen just completely outplayed them and kept all three of them rather quiet for the entire game. So that's an outstanding performance.
Yeah, I've got to agree with you there. Elisha, what did you think were some of the things we could have done better in that match?
Well, the main one I thought of was the one you highlighted, probably finishing. It's sort of, in one way, we played very well, and it's a bit of a shame we were lucky to win in the end. Someone was sent off, so it was good to hold on, but Wales were there with a chance, so they really shouldn't have been. And the second thing I thought was that just defending immediately after a turnover is something we're not good at still, and that was very obvious in the Wales game where they were able to go long distances quickly because of that occasionally. After we lose the ball, we don't reshape quickly into defence yet. That might be just a teamwork thing, knowing where players are, still learning the system a little bit under Mackenzie possibly. So that was probably the two main things in that match. Overall, that was a quality performance. Wales aren't cheap to beat. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I thought the defence has improved, really well, particularly on this tour. But there were still instances where we had, a breakdown in what's going on. There was one where the Wallabies were well and truly outnumbered on the right side of their defence. And, in the last couple of weeks, they've been using their jockey defence really well to slide across. This time, Cooper came up out of the line and tried to go hard and cut the ball off and, then had to chase 40 metres to shut down the break that was made. And then, obviously, there was the defensive, I think it was a miscommunication between Scott Fardy and Christian Leolofano when George North went in for his try.
Oh, yeah.
And basically, the system or the structure they had in place was they should have been pushing out. So therefore, Fardy really should have been taking North, coming back at him. It ended up in a situation where he didn't come across enough, was looking at the inside man, and Leolofano sort of got caught between should I come in or should I go out. So there's still some work to do, but certainly it was a lot better. Uncle, as I said, that's 9 wins in a row against Wales. Does that win help us in our pool match against Wales in the World Cup in 2015, do you think?
Well, Scott, it certainly it doesn't do us any harm. However, I'm of the opinion that if we were going to rely on our past record come World Cup, we're just creating a false economy for ourselves. We think this run of form against Wales since 2008 will have much bearing when the two sides face off at Twickenham on 10 October 2015 and in a much anticipated pool match. I say this as the Rugby World Cup, it's an entirely different beast to a Northern Tour or an inbound tour that we may host, because the tournament itself presents its own opportunities and threats, and the threats for the Wallabies is to rely on what's happened in the past. The game is as good as lost if we entertain any idea that our previous form will see us through in 2015. There's an old saying, only a fool plays yesterday's game. Come World Cup, we just simply must be in the moment and play accordingly if we're going to progress, whether it be against Wales, England, Fiji or any other opponent we may come up against.
Absolutely, and I see that the Wallabies are going to be playing Wales and England on the end-of-year tour again next year, so those matches will probably have more relevance than this year. So we get another crack at England before we get to the World Cup as well.
Always relish another chance to have a crack at England. I think we should give England some credit for the way they played against us. They certainly they played their natural game, their forward power game. However, I've mentioned this on the side a couple of times. It's not because I particularly enjoy beating England. I'll say this objectively. At where they are with Lancaster's team, they have a World Cup winning pack. However, they are quite an uncreative team behind 8. And I really think they need a second playmaker in that 10-12 area if they're going to threaten any higher. And I'm actually of the opinion that they are actually under some threat to not qualify themselves, because I firmly believe we're heading in the right direction. And I think Wales has more talent behind their 8 than England does. So psychologically, there's going to be some pressure on them.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, who do we think was the Wallabies player of this match and then the tour? Brett?
I don't think I can go past Stephen Moore, mate. I mentioned on Tuesday online that I think the guy's a machine. I'm quite sure he's not human, and whatever the hell we feed him in between games is working a treat, because he's just a phenomenal. And I very deliberately said it. I'm surprised no one picked me up on it, actually, but I very deliberately said that if he is not the best hooker in the world by now, he must be in the grand final. And it's possibly only Bismarck Duplessis that you might argue the point with. Moore's game has just gone to a different level. If we think about even how well he played this time last year, he's now so much more involved at the breakdown. He's always been a really good defender, really tough tackler. But suddenly now he's got, passing and offload games added to it as well. And you think about his offload, a couple of offloads on that in the games against Italy and Ireland led to tries. There was another try that in the lead up to Scott Fardy's offload, which I think was to Michael Hooper. Moore was standing at fly half and took the ball first receive it, threw a spiral past 15 to 20 metres to find Matty Tamura, I think it was. So, just a phenomenal all-round player, and I can't go past him.
Elisha, what about you?
For player of the match, it might be Scott Fardy, I think. I just think what he does on the field, he's just involved so much more than an Australian number 6 has been since probably Elsom was actually playing well for Australia before he left to Ireland, I'd say. His involvements let Hooper do what Hooper does best finally, instead of Hooper being attached to a normal flanker's role 100% of the time. And Fardy's got an ability also with the ball that I've noticed in the last couple of test matches more than I did during the Super Rugby season. Fardy's just got that little link pass where the forward takes it, stops, and then flicks it back to the back running around, which is something the Wallabies haven't had for a couple of years now. So it's good to see Moore and probably Fardy add that to their game in the last couple of months.
Yeah, and Uncle, who stood out for you?
I just would start by saying I'm actually, I couldn't agree more with Brett and Elisha that selecting forwards, because we all saw the wonderful work that Cooper and Folau managed to do, but the acknowledgement that forward platform was set up by the guys up front led me to select Sekope Kepu, someone who I've been critical over the years. However, I thought he was outstanding on the weekend in the sense of there wasn't a lot of scrums, but Richard Hibbard in particular, the very abrasive Welsh and British Lions hooker, was quite vocal during the week how they were going to bash Australia out of the game. And when he came 1-on-1 with Sekope Kepo in about the 18th minute, trying to run it out, the way that he was just ragdolled, it was a statement. It was a Wallaby statement that whatever's happened in the past is over. There is a new Wallaby pack. This is our new attitude. We were down 13-8. We were on the line, and we needed to come away with some points. And it was just such a statement, the way that he so abrasively got into Hibbard, and Michael Hooper brilliantly swept on to Hibbard, and the backs realigned superbly, which led to the Leali'ifano try, which I really believe set us up to dominate that middle 40 of the game. I think that's probably the best tackle I've seen from Australian front rower since Topo Rodriguez at Eden Park in 1986, and it rattled the Welsh to a man.
Jesus.
Yeah, I'll say that, Brett.
Specific.
I sat back there and I thought, when was the last time a prop in break and play really made a statement that we could look back on that was the new attitude of Australian rugby? And in understanding what Topo was doing in 1986, he was telling the All Blacks, mate, the game's up, we're coming to get you. And he threw Hicka Reid back, ironically another hooker, who was a tough guy. And he just let the All Blacks know, not today, fellas. And I thought Kepu, who I saw play in Brisbane against the British Lions, and I thought he was dreadful. I watched him specifically pushing on mauls, and I thought, you're a lazy player, I don't know what you're doing here. So I certainly wasn't trying to give Kepu some light because I'm a fan, but I was very impressed with his effort against Wales. And I think if we can get him a bit fitter, he certainly has shown he's got the aggression to get in there and really disrupt some of these bigger packs.
Yeah, well, look, isn't it great that there's three of you have selected forwards, and I'm going to go for a forward as well.
Lovely.
I definitely think Stephen Moore was the player of the tour for the Wallabies, closely followed by Scott Fardy. And it would only be then that I'd be starting to talk about Quade Cooper and Israel Folau. So finally we're getting forwards who are coming to the top of the pile. Elisha, you've got another point on the breakdown?
Yeah, just quickly on the try that Folau scored off about the third phase after a set piece. The first two tackles on that phase play, Adam Ashley Cooper got annihilated, and then James Horwell got annihilated in the tackle. And both times we were able to get quick ball still. And I think that's a fairly good example of an implicit improvement in the Wallabies playing. Maybe 12 months ago we would have deflated and not gotten the ball back so quickly to take advantage of that 5-metre attacking zone. Because we got to the line more times than you think against New Zealand, for instance. We got into the attacking areas, and if there was a big hit on, that was it. That the ball was coming back out the other side, we weren't getting it back.
Yeah, the breakdown's certainly a critical area for the Wallabies, and for any team for that matter. I mean, there's always lots of discussion in the articles on the Raw as to the effectiveness of players at the breakdown, and whether we should be measuring that rather than just, who turns up at a breakdown or who turns up first at a breakdown. And that's certainly true. There's a lot of work involved, but it's certainly something I've wanted to look at for a while. So I've started a summer project, and I'm looking at the end-of-year tour matches for the Wallabies and going into a lot of detail as to who does what at the breakdown. After the first two matches that I've done so far, the results are fascinating as to who's doing what.
Can I have a guess, Scott, and wonder if it's going to be a couple of names that perhaps suggested as being low work rate players?
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots goes on in the breakdown that isn't immediately obvious unless you look in a lot of detail. What I've done is to set up a points ranking system. So when players are actually at the breakdown, they get a certain number of base points for actually being there, but then they get more points the more positive their impact on the breakdown was, and they have points deducted if their impact to the breakdown is negative. After the first two matches that I've actually completed, James Horwell had been the most effective of all the Wallabies.
I was thinking of him, to be honest.
I thought you were going to say Rob Simmons, to be perfectly honest.
Well, I've only done the first two matches, and of course Rob Simmons didn't play in that first match.
Good on him for responding to being dropped as captain and making sure that he's not sulking on the field. I mean, that's a good sign of some maturity there.
If I could just take you back to the breakdown, I recall earlier in the year, you when we were playing the All Blacks in the Rugby Championship, you were identifying how the Wallaby back row wasn't exactly working in concert with each other for the 80. In particular, Hooper and Fardy. what I picked up as this Northern tour went on, and I think what we've all discussed tonight is that they really are starting to work as quite a combative unit. And Vardy's work over the ball at the breakdown is quite unparalleled for some time by a blindside flanker in the Wallaby jumper, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's one of the differences. When I did a smaller version of this exercise, as you say, what I found was that the back row just weren't doing enough work. They weren't getting into the breakdown first, and that's what a back row should do. Once somebody's over the ball, the opposition, you then need the bigger guys to smash them out of the way. Particularly a 7 finds that hard to do. But now what we're seeing is Vardy's doing a lot of that work that you might normally expect a typical or a traditional number 7 to do, which I think, as Elisha pointed out, is freeing Hooper up a little bit. So all of a sudden the combination is working between, both flankers. Brett, you had a point about left and right flankers.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to sort of follow up on Uncle's point there, and the thing I noticed on the spring tour was how much Vardy and Hooper were actually playing not necessarily as blindside open side, but as left right. And again, whether that's by design or whether that's just how things have worked out, it does seem to have freed Hooper up to do what he does best. And as we've been saying, Vardy is genuinely one of the best over the ball forwards, I think, in Australia right now. So, it's this accidental combination that we've sort of discussed a few times, and I've certainly mentioned in articles and columns and things, but it's something that's been stumbled upon that just seems to work well. So it'll just be interesting to see whether they continue to play that through into next year.
Yeah, mate, as soon as they did that, it helped the scrum stabilise. As soon as they went to forget, open and blind, it was getting our biggest guy, which was Vardy, onto the tight head side of the scrum, and that's the guy who needs the support. Whether he was on the open side or not, it didn't matter. I mean, you can't go past the fact that Hooper doesn't contribute a lot at scrum time. I mean, he's just not a big enough guy. That's just not who he is. That's not a criticism of him. It's just that's something he can't do. So really good tactics from them to switch that.
Sort of makes you then wonder whether we might be sort of perhaps on the verge of a bit of a new way of flankers playing in Australia.
I think we're probably going back to the past, actually, there, Brett. I mean, respectfully, mate, I think you both made really great points, but, we're just going back a few generations, 20-odd years, where we may have played a left and right flanker combination, and certainly, correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, looking even back to the 91 World Cup, we had, I think it was Poitier and Offengowie pretty much playing left and right as opposed to traditional open side, blind side. So I think we're not reinventing the wheel. We're just going back into the textbook and finding out what used to work. And I think it's a credit to the Australian scrummaging, the Australian scrum and Blades and McKenzie for willing to entertain it, because it certainly has paid off.
Fairly similar to the way South Africa and France play, isn't it? They don't necessarily play open side, blind side. It's very much left, right, and like you say, Scott, it's just a matter of getting the bigger guy behind the tight head bum.
Yeah, I think it's been a matter of the team adapting to what each player, and Hooper's one of them, but there are other players that the team has had to adapt to how those individuals work. You can't just say a player has to change to fit the team. So if you take Hooper, for example, he's got some fantastic attributes. Obviously his speed, his work rate, his attack is very good, but let's face it, when it comes to the physical side of the game, he doesn't have that physicality and that strength. So the Wallabies have had to adapt, and particularly at scrum time when he doesn't have the weight and really doesn't add a lot behind his prop, they've adapted very well by just changing to this left and right flanker setup.
Absolutely, Scott. If I could just add, I think by Scott Vardy taking that role in the scrum, I think Hooper's actually blossomed in his running game and his latter phase play to the point where he's running, as you say, he has the speed and the power to run out with the backs. Either he is a genuine running option himself, or he creates that threat which creates the space and puts defence in two minds. And with a general like Cooper we talk about how he's learning to work in with Kurandrani and Folau. I think he's really going to learn how to work in with what Michael Hooper can do as we progress. And I started out being a Queenslander, more of a Liam Gill fan, but I'm absolutely sold that Michael Hooper is really going to take this team forward, because I love the way he plays the game. I love his passion for the team, and his game is just going from height to height, and he's just an exciting talent.
Yeah, all right. So what we've sort of transgressed into the next part of the discussion, which is, I wanted to talk about where the Wallabies are, given the end of the year tour, and what it means for going forward. If we think back to earlier in the year, I mean, there were some pretty dark days earlier in the year. I mean, at the end of the Lions series, things weren't good. It was a tough time for a changeover of coach. The team was obviously a little deflated after the Lions loss. And Ewan McKenzie coming in really only had 2 weeks with the group to prepare for back-to-back matches against the All Blacks. And let's face it, they were pretty red hot this year. I said at the time that happened that I didn't think that was enough time for Ewan McKenzie or the new coaching group, because there's a new structure, not just one new coach, to actually make that much of a difference, and that I thought it would take until the end of year tour until we saw some difference. If you look back, and I'm currently cutting up a 2013 highlights video, so I've been looking back as I put the clips together. I mean, that third match in the Rugby Championship against the Springboks in Brisbane was a real low point. I mean, it was just terrible performance. And players were trying so hard, and maybe too hard, but they weren't working as a team. And there was no confidence, you could see it. As a result, combinations weren't working, they were dropping balls. And one of the interesting things I found as I looked back through preparing the highlights clip is that some of the exact same plays and structures they've used on this end-of-year tour were being used. So they're obviously something they'd planned, but they were dropping the ball or people were forgetting their role. So it's just taken that amount of time to sort of get things together. Basically, during that period when things weren't going well, there were only 3 things that held up, I thought. And one was the form of Israel Folau, who has just, I think, gotten better every game he's played. The Wallabies line-out held up, even during those tough times, and Christian Lealifano's goal kicking. Ewan McKenzie, at one point there after the third Bledisloe, was 2 from 7, and there were even some people calling for another change of coach. He ends the year with 6 from 12, or a 50% record. There seems to be some confidence in the group, and as a result, passes are sticking and things are happening for them. But where are we really? There's a number of questions that I'd like to discuss tonight, and first up is the culture of the Wallabies. There have been a number of issues during the year. We're all well aware of the Hungry Jacks incident during the Lions, or coming up to the Lions' final test. Obviously, we've had players stood down in the Dublin test. We've had James O'Connor's contract ripped up, and there's a number of other cultural issues. Are we headed in the right direction? Uncle, what are your thoughts?
Oh, look, I have many on this subject, Scott, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. So if I could just take you back to that Brisbane test, where we were very, very soundly beaten by the Springboks, a person that I know who's had some involvement with rugby for 50-odd years at the highest level, saw the team at the Brisbane airport the day after, and was actually speaking with Ewan McKenzie and had a chat. And Ewan said to him, "Don't worry about us, mate. We are going to be fine." And so he was quite confident from there that we were heading in the right direction. And my colleague noticed this. The team, there was nothing dejected about them. They were exceptionally well presented. They seemed to be a happy bunch. So whilst things weren't going for them, he could see that, look, there's something in this group that is going to gel eventually. And I think we're starting to see that. Considering where we've come from, I was just reading an article the last couple of days about former Wallaby winger Drew Mitchell signing on with Toulon for the last couple of years. And Mitchell was commenting on how impressed he was with his new teammates, Ali Williams and Bucky's Botha. In particular, how they prepare themselves and how they do the extra things. Now, Mitchell went on to say he was seeking their respect, so he was going to start to put in as well. Now, Drew's a highly experienced winger with 60-odd tests under his belt. And what spoke volumes to me was it took him to get to Toulon to see how to prepare. And the ARU, I can only conclude from this that the ARU hadn't really taught these blokes, or there wasn't a culture of how to get yourself, really well prepared to take on a game. And it comes as no surprise to me that Ali Williams and Bucky's both are world champions respectively, and Drew Mitchell isn't. we have to have a look back into Wallaby history, because I think history teaches us a lot about culture. And this new culture shift, it's not that something that hasn't happened in Australian rugby before. And I've talked about this on the Raw before. 1974 was a major year for the Australian Rugby Union. They decided, look, we have to change the way we approach the game. We're getting beaten up, and we need to be more forward dominant. And Peter Criddle and Dick Marks essentially travelled to Wales and were given a coaching manual on how to scrummage and how to play the forward game. Now, the boys went away in 75, 76 and didn't have a successful tour in regards to results. However, the genesis of a team started to bond, and it's a particularly tight team that went on in 2 years later to defeat the Welsh in 2 tests and to narrowly lose the Bledisloe in New Zealand in 78, but had that wonderful win at Eden Park where they defeated the All Blacks 30-16. They bashed them out of the game. And by 79 and 80, we'd won the Bledisloe Cup. Now, this just didn't happen by chance. And people can talk about a great generation of players. But there was a culture there that they were going to take them on in the forwards. Now, essentially, a lot of those guys who'd won in 78, 79, 80 went away with the 81 and 82 Wallabies. However, that was a different show altogether. It was an appallingly coached team and an appallingly managed team. And I recall being in a hotel in Scotland and Edinburgh 3 days before the test and seeing it. I won't mention his name because it's not fair to him, and he'd probably be ashamed of himself now, but there was a young Wallaby 3 days out from kickoff in the hotel bar in his number ones, and he was pissed. And I've never forgotten it. Now, came no surprise to me whatsoever that we were beaten by Scotland that weekend. We simply had a culture change. We had a new regime came in, and there was no discipline. And with respect to Bob Dwyer, we waffled around for a couple of years, and Bob was learning the ropes as an international coach. But Alan Jones brought back this new culture, this professionalism that we needed. And people can talk about Mark Ella till the cows come home. I think he's one of our greatest number 10s, but bear with me here. He was an outstanding club player with a lot of talent, but he was unfit. And Jones pulled him aside and said, "You're coming on the tour, but you're not coming unless you're fit," as essentially I've been told by those in the know back then. And I find it no surprise that Ella had only scored 1 test try prior to that tour that absolutely set the world on fire in 1984 because Jones got him fit. And he reaped the reward of it. As we move on, through to 89, we had another change in moment where Bob Dwyer got rid of a lot of old wood. That set us up for 91. And the same in 97 when Rod McQueen took over. And we lost to Argentina. It's reported to me that Rod McQueen was quite distressed at this loss and was strongly considering quitting. The senior boys got around him and said, "No, you're staying on as coach." And they got him through. And later Jeff Miller came into the side as an assistant coach of sorts and also as a bit of a cultural ambassador. And I think quietly behind the scenes, Jeff Miller had a lot to do with getting that team back on track, which got them to that 99 World Cup win. And I think the last 10 years or so, we have been in the culture wilderness a bit with the introduction of rugby league players. And with all due respect to Robbie Deans being an All Black, it seemed like the right idea at the time. He had all the form as a coach, but 2020 vision, he just wasn't the right guy for the Australian rugby culture.
What I found really strange was the team had gone through the incident where Kurtley Beale and James O'Connor had been out till 4 o'clock in the morning in a Hungry Jack's. No suggestion they were doing anything wrong, but it's days before a really important test match. Now, whatever was going on, I would have thought that regardless of who the coach was, and the senior players were quoted in the press as saying they were drawing a line in the sand that this sort of thing wasn't going to happen anymore. And then, we get to Ireland and we hear that there are players still out till past 3 o'clock in the morning. I would have thought that, they would have looked at themselves, particularly with a new coach coming in after what happened during the Lions series, and said, enough's enough. That isn't going to happen again. And, you're getting paid a lot of money. You're representing your country. So it's not only, national pride, but you're being paid. You can't be going out. till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. No matter how much you drink, doesn't matter whether you don't have a drink. You can be totally sober and have had lemon squash all night. 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning is not what a professional sportsman needs to be doing.
At least this time Mackenzie did actually hit them where it hurt and not let them play. That didn't happen to Kurtley Beale and O'Connor. So he's made a very stark contrast in his coaching style there from the get-go for him, which is, I mean, I can applaud that. Even if, like you said, even if they didn't do anything, the reaction is still appropriate in light of the context of this team over the last couple of years. That's for sure.
There's certainly no doubt now what the rules are there?
Exactly, that's right.
Brett?
Yeah, just a very, very quick one on this. It seems to be nowadays, in terms of Australian professional sport, the Sydney Swans seem to be used as a bit of a benchmark for team culture, and you know they're now fabled almost no dickheads policy. It's just very much a benchmark of self-marking, if you like. Ultimately, the players are answerable to themselves, and I think if you look at all the good performing teams around the country now, and you can actually see it a little bit now in the Wallabies since all this has happened, and especially in the Australian cricket team as well, something has happened, and ultimately the action has come about because someone within the playing group wasn't happy about it and wasn't happy about what went on. And so, yes, that goes against the whole grain of, dobbing in your mates and all that, but ultimately all those teams are going to be in a better place because of it. And so when the players are going to be answerable to themselves and they're going to be genuinely letting down their mates if they are doing the wrong thing, that can only build the culture within, and that can only build your stability and things moving forward as well.
Whether it's in the amateur or the professional era, you're representing your country. And there was a very good article written by a British journalist in the Telegraph on why the All Blacks are so good off the field, and it's about the family, the whānau they call it. And they essentially say they had their own issues back in 2004 with alcohol and some culture, and Sir Graham came in and just cleaned the whole place up. Where there may have been guys who were seriously talented rugby players, but they weren't essentially the right men to wear the jumper. And they have a mantra that good men make good All Blacks. And I would find it very hard to argue against the way the All Blacks have conducted themselves since Graham Henry came into the fold, and Steve Hansen. That transition's just been a wonderful example to any organisation on how to keep an empire growing. We can learn a lot from that, and I think, as you hit on, Brett, about the no dickheads policy, that was certainly mentioned, but it's not about the player anymore. There's some serious talent out there, but unless you're willing to wear the jumper and give it the reverence it deserves, you're just not going to get picked under Mackenzie, and I applaud him for it.
So that's the end of part one. Come back next week for part two, where we'll talk some more about what we can expect from the Wallabies and which players will be involved in 2014.